and are just some of the words that you may hear in today's podcast. Enjoy. I haven't eaten, Georgios.
Yes, you seem unusually normally fed.
That's why, if you want to see me fed, watered, and not starvationing,
You're like a plant, is what you're saying.
go onto the website, which is
Infoperfected.com.
and click on to the donate button.
Yes.
On the donate button, you can PayPal us some cash.
Yes, pretty much. Because the best things in life are free, but not this podcast.
Well, it is. I mean, you get it for free, but you could chuck us a couple of quid.
So what we're trying to say is, if you want to make sure that this isn't the best podcast, give us some money.
I'm just begging you for some food. Hello and welcome to the Perfect Information Podcast, a board game podcast of accidental spirit wrangling with me, Ben Maddox, and the ever-living, ever-loving
Yodros Panayotidis.
The spectacular beauty of the breadth of human endeavour, coupled with the natural brilliance of the surroundings that surround us, lead me to believe that there is some sort of plan that brought us together, Georgios, into this room, and that plan is the indefinable natural law of brilliance.
I think that's about the level of decorum and humility that I think people expect from us nowadays.
So, what are we talking about today, Georgios?
Well, the way I understand it, we're talking about fake accents done badly.
That's right. Well, the whole intro there, the whole poetic bit, was a complete non sequitur.
It was.
I was just talking out of my arse because that is my want.
Yes. And that's why I came dressed in a sombrero and a big moustache. Got some funny looks from the Mexican place. I don't know why. But it did greet
That's cultural appropriation, Georgios. Wearing a sombrero that you're sold in Mexico is cultural appropriation. Don't do it.
Yeah. Well, I did give...
Being a racist, Georgios, is cultural appropriation. You're appropriating my culture as a British person, Georgios. Don't do it.
Right. Well, I did give them the natural salute that you taught me.
That's right.
Yo soy sin cojones.
Indeed. So, today we're talking about teaching.
Yes.
We're talking about teaching games. And the reason I came up with this idea is that I went to a convention last week.
Yes, you did.
And I went to this convention and you demo games. And there are lots of people teaching you games. And I was taught games by people. And whilst they explained the mechanics of the games to me, I felt that there was a difficulty in grasping the macro of the game as a whole.
Yes.
And I felt the big problem was that they would teach the micro. They would say, oh, this space does this, and this space does this, and this space does this, and this space does this. You score points by doing X, and you put points by doing Y. And they never told me the outline of the game. They never told me the journey from A to Z. And so I found myself floundering within this whole morass of mechanics and abilities and point scoring opportunities without knowing what to do. So, to start, when you were a newbie and you were being introduced to games by people,
right?
What was your experience of having those games taught to you? Were they generally negative? Were they generally positive? Do you find people in general are pretty good at it or pretty bad at it?
I'm not sure. Actually, I don't really remember the first couple of games people taught me, or at least I don't remember them in the sense of being particularly good or bad. Nowadays, I at some point I started paying more attention to how I introduce games, how I teach them. Naturally, this led to me paying attention to how other people teach them. If you've been following this podcast for a while, you will have noticed that I have a lot of negative things to say about other people.
Strangely, though, not me.
No.
You're usually universal in your praise of me.
Yes. Again, your local dialect confuses me somewhat, but if you mean what I think you mean, then yes.
So when I found your diary the other day,
right,
and it was just pictures of stickmen, like shagging each other,
right,
and the one shagging had an arrow saying Georgios,
yes,
and the one being shagged had an arrow saying Ben, and underneath it just said #live your dreams. What did that mean?
That was actually a Twitter competition.
Oh, right.
The #live your dreams basically called out, how would that look like? And I thought, I can't draw.
Oh, so you were just using that to practice your art or something?
Yes, art. Yes. Art.
Anyway, so yeah, you were talking about being taught games.
Yeah, I was being taught games, and I noticed certain, I don't want to call them mistakes, but at least certain stumbling blocks people unintentionally bring up when they talk about games. Things like, the distinction made between macro and micro, maybe. Focusing too heavily on particular edge cases, on very specific uses of very specific rules, for no other apparent purpose other than, having mentioned them and then sort of referencing them later on, like 2 hours into the game where you go, oh, I told you that 2 hours ago, that confusing edge case that did make sense then, and get out of, being called a dick for not explaining things properly.
Well, that's interesting. To what degree do you think people get bogged down with the fear of explaining games to gamers?
Oh, very.
Because I've explained lots of games in my life, and very often you'll explain something. Or you'll explain the rules and you'll explain everything to the best of your ability. Then you'll get to the point where something happens and you have to look in the rule book for it. Mm-hmm. Because this is inevitable when you first play a game. And then some dickhead will go, oh, you didn't bloody tell me that.
Yes.
As if it's the end of the bloody world. As if if they lose this game, they're going to be thrown into Guantanamo Bay or something. And
I don't know how you handle your gaming groups.
What I do, I hold a lot of people hostage. I call it my cellar of fun, Georgios.
Well, that's why it's sort of, these are the kind of compromises you have to make to get funded by the US government.
Indeed, as we are.
Yes, we are funded by the US government.
Everyone who listens to our podcast are being monitored on their habits. But yeah, I mean, it seems to me that a lot of people bog down their explanations of games with all the unnecessary details, all the edge cases, all the possible examples of things that can go wrong, for fear of that dickhead who's sitting at the table 10 minutes later going, you never told me that.
Well, there are two things coming together there. For one, there's the social, I'm going to call it, for lack of a better word, social anxiety of being blamed for somebody else having a bad time at the game because they lost for reasons they don't feel are fair.
Right.
In theory, it's true if somebody sort of withholds vital information from you and uses it to their advantage, that's a dick move. It just is. It has happened, I think, twice in my sort of gaming career.
They deliberately withheld rules to advantage themselves, or they just made a mistake and left them out?
No, I think they did leave things unclear enough for them to take advantage of somebody else's ignorance.
Right.
And that happened twice, and I've been sort of playing heavily for more than 10 years now. It's not an occurrence that happens often. Well, in my experience.
I find something similar to that happens.
Right.
That I played Blood Rage, and I played it once. And part of the reason I haven't played it since, I mean, there's opportunities and stuff, but part of the reason it left a bad taste in my mouth.
Right.
Because we were playing it with one guy. There was 4 people who hadn't played it and one guy who had played it a number of times. Mm-hmm. And he didn't withhold rules.
Right.
But he withheld strategies. Mm-hmm. And nobody really knew what they were doing apart from him, who absolutely perfectly knew what he was doing. Yeah. And he leveraged those strategies perfectly to absolutely destroy the rest of us, right? Yes. Which I kind of understand. Well, you could argue, well, that's fine. You're playing the game. I think withholding the rules to win the game, you can argue is just wrong on all levels.
Yeah, it's just cheating.
Whereas doing this is not wrong, but the thing is, I mean, firstly, it's self-defeating.
Yeah.
Because what happens is the people you play with don't want to play with you again.
Basically.
So you end up shooting yourself in the foot if you ever want to play the game again. And secondly, it's just dickish. It's just,
it is, yeah.
All I care about is winning specifically, not having a challenge. And so I'm not talking about tailoring your style of play to make yourself play worse, but all I'm talking about is offering advice to other players to enable them to play better.
Yeah, right? Sure. But then, again, you move into this vague area of people calling you either alpha gamer, taking their turns for taking somebody else's turns for them, or just taking away the joy and experience, the joy that comes from learning the game, not just the rules, but learning how things work. Because there's a certain sense of discovery, of exploration as you enter new games. You figure out, oh, if I do this, then this happens, this is exciting. And this kind of exploration and discovery is fun. It just is. I enjoy it a lot, and it's one of the reasons why I keep coming back to games like Cosmic Encounter, because due to all these aliens and the special abilities, the combinations, I can do this and this now. It's exciting. It's fun. And I'm not saying that this criticism is justified when you start withholding basic strategies from games, but I think this is sort of the fear that people have, that if they start explaining strategies, either people are not going to listen to them, because it's just too much information for them right now, or they will rob them of this enjoyment of discovering the game on their own.
But surely if you say that when you're explaining the rules and you sit there and you say, okay, so you win points by doing this.
Yeah.
Remember, you win points by doing this.
Right.
That is explaining a strategy, but without explaining a strategy, right? Or secondly, at the end of the rules explanation, and you say, okay, you don't have to listen to me, but I suggest probably on your first few turns, you want to do X, Y, and Z in some combination because that's going to set you up for later.
Yeah.
I mean, people can't have an objection to that, surely, can they?
Well, we live in a post-fact democracy. I don't know what people have an objection to anymore. But yeah, I agree with you. Some guidelines, some helping hand to sort of level out the difference in experience in the game should be there. If I have played a game dozens of times and I'm playing it with people who've never played it before, I would be foolish and it would be unsportsmanlike to go with my high-end strategies that have been tried and tested and leave everybody else sort of floundering around figuring out whether they're supposed to place their worker before they pay or after, one way or the other. So yes, generally I agree with you. You should give people a guiding hand because you might have played the game more often than they, and you want to have a good time, if you want them to have a good time, you should try to meet on the same level.
But that's kind of a sidebar. That's sort of to the side of what we're talking about. Go back to this notion of the person saying, but you never told me that.
Right.
Is it a problem with our conception of teachers in general? In that we have certain people within our society, right? Mm-hmm. Doctors, lawyers, architects, teachers, and we expect them to have all the knowledge.
If you forgot podcasters.
Yeah. And we expect them to have all the knowledge.
Right.
So we expect if you're a science teacher to know everything about science and be able to answer all of our questions. Therefore, we're naturally conditioned, if someone is teaching us something,
right,
we're naturally conditioned to expect them to know everything. And then when they don't, we feel gypped because we don't think they're qualified to have taught us. Do you think that's something?
No, I think I don't think it's that complicated in the context of a board game. I think in the context of a board game, it just feels like something of a betrayal because the implicit assumption is we're all here to play together and compete. And if you're competing with somebody, you assume to give them a fair chance. And withholding information would be sort of taking that fair chance away.
So we leap to the assumption.
Yeah.
We leap to the assumption automatically that we're being cheated.
Yes.
We automatically assume our perception of other people is that they are intrinsically dishonest and seeking to gain the upper hand on us.
I think this is a very convenient and easy and just a convenient excuse to deal with the frustration of not playing well.
Do you think this is a modern thing?
No.
Do you think this notion of distrusting people who are ostensibly within our community, thinking that everyone is a rugged individualist seeking to get whatever they can using any method they can, is a modern preoccupation? Or do you think that is a human truth that we naturally assume everyone's out to rip us off?
No, cynicism is the refuge of cowards. That's basically it. I think it's an easy escape to just avoid the complexity of human interaction. Just go, instead of dealing with, all right, this is a complicated issue, this is a complicated situation, people have complex motivations and intentions. You just go, no, everyone's a dick, everyone's out to harm me, everyone's out for their own. So, you get two things. A, you don't need to be actually involved in anything because, everyone's out to get you anyway. I'm just going to get cheated. And B, you're giving yourself an excuse to act like a gigantic Trump. Just an awful human because everyone else is doing it as well. Why should I keep sort of live up to higher standards? So, I don't think it's a modern development. It's just this apathy and cynicism just becoming more pronounced in an easy, like I said, easy, comfortable, convenient escape from being a grown-up.
And so it's not that whether human beings are intrinsically good or bad. What's damaging is our perception of human beings being intrinsically bad.
Yes.
Which encourages us, which then gives us the license to vent our own negative feeling.
And to act on them even.
So, okay, let's go back to the teaching of board games bit.
Yeah, the important part.
What else have you seen within the teaching of board games that you feel people get wrong? What are regular things people get wrong?
I think the biggest issue I see, and it's something I've only recently managed to put into words for myself and paid more attention to, is that outside of just explaining the rules and how they work, or maybe even delving into some of the basic strategies of a game, I think most people who teach board games lose sight of the fact that you're not just teaching the rules, you also need to teach the tone, you need the style, you need to sort of project the kind of atmosphere you expect this, or the spirit. You failed to explain the spirit in which the game should be played.
How important is the 30-second fluff elevator pitch? Because they always say, everyone says, when you teach a game, you should open up by saying, you are a merchant seeking to leverage the dildo trade. The person who sells the most dildos by the end of the game becomes the dildo king and rules latex production for the next 50 years. How important
of
is
the
that?
Mediterranean. It's a great game. I think it is useful to a certain extent because the way you present this fluff text, I think what I'm trying to say is to teach the spirit of the game, you need, as a teacher, so to speak, you need to engage in some kind of performance. It doesn't need to be an explicit performance where you change voices or anything, but the way you explain the rules, the tone, the way you talk about the so-called fluff text, the way you sort of play it up or play it down, tells everybody else at the game, at the table, very strongly how they should approach the game. If you're going to just, discard it, sort of make fun of the thematic disconnect, people are not going to engage the game on anything else but the mechanical level.
Does it have to, is it this magic circle question? If you go, this game's not very thematic and people's engagement will be disconnected.
I don't know, it's probably not directly tied to the magic circle, but it is very much the idea of sort of how we interact, whether we will be very competitive or whether we'll be very, easygoing, has a lot to do with how you explain the game. If I were to explain a game like Cosmic Encounter in a very, very strict rules-only sense, I would wager that it'll be unlikely that people are going to start laughing the first time somebody plays an unexpected negotiation card. They just go, why? You don't get any advantage and so on. But if you start talking about the wackiness of it, you start up the unexpected reversals, unexpected twists, and all of a sudden somebody plays a flare that destroys everything, you kind of get a sense of where this game is supposed to go, how serious you're supposed to take defeats and victories. And I think this is pivotal to making the game work, regardless of whether you stick to the rules or not. It's really important that everybody understands how they're supposed to play the game, as opposed to how they're supposed to follow the rules.
What about management of expectations? If you're playing, so I played Django the other night, right? Really heavy Euro. Took me 2 turns to even understand not what to do, but why I would do it.
Yeah.
It made no sense to me until I'd got the flow of the game, and then afterwards you get the flow of the game. So if I was teaching it, for instance, I would say to the people I was teaching, don't expect to win the first time. Don't expect to even do particularly well. It'll take you till the end of the game to grok what's going on. How important do you think management of expectations is?
I think the way you described it is, I think, very, very, very important here, very poignant, is that you're not so much managing expectations, but you're preparing them for frustrations, because every game is tied to frustrations. Most of them are small. I didn't get the resources I want, or I want to roll a 5, but I only rolled a 4, but I can do this, this, and this. It's all about helping people get a handle on the frustration that the game is going to create, whether they want to or not, but doing it in a way that they're prepared, that they don't get too annoyed, and sort of signaling to them that this kind of frustration is going to hit everyone at some point. Everyone either already went through this phase of frustration, or they're going to at some point, because they're going to lose, because you're going to steal an important resource from them, and it's fine. Sort of giving them license to be mad at these moments of frustration, but in a way that is acceptable within,
and within the context of the game, and doesn't feel like it's a meta act of pettiness.
It's not just, oh, I'm so mad right now, I'm frustrated because everybody's shutting me out by seeing my resources, because you're telling them you're going to get frustrated because they're going to see your resource. It's part of the game, accept it, get mad at it, but don't take it personally. Don't feel attacked. Don't let it diminish your enjoyment of the game, because this is part of the package.
And this is part of the reason why I think, unfortunately, they're a necessity, because they're the only practical way to do it. But board games, right, are tactile and visual.
Yes, very visual.
And rule books are fundamentally poor at teaching games, even if they're very well written. So whenever I read a rule book, usually, if I just sit and read a rule book, it makes no sense to me, because it's divorced from the context of the game. That's why someone teaching you a game is you're always going to get how to play it much quicker, much easier than if you read it from a rule book. So I think there are three sort of levels of this. There is the rule book, which is the worst. And it's the only sort of practical way to disseminate the rules over a large area, really. A game needs a rule book, and you need a reference. Piece of reference. And once you know the rules of the game, obviously referring to the book then gives you context for the sentences, which makes them easier to understand. Then secondly, there's the video tutorial, which are a great resource, but they still pale into the person physically there teaching you the game, moving the pieces, and when you ask questions, being able to move the pieces back, move the pieces forward.
I think this is the central point. I mean, both the book and the video tutorial are monodirectional. There's no dialogue there. There's no easy way to just repeat. Sure, you can jump back in the sentence, but you jump back a page, or rewind the video like 20 seconds or something, but you can't really ask a focused question. You can't sort of ask someone to make something clearer. And since when you're teaching a game, when you're being taught a game, you can usually assume that the person teaching the game has a certain structure in mind. Like, this is where I'm building up. I'm explaining all these things, providing context to give you this additional piece of information that will make that sort of make sense within the context. You don't have this extra contextual information in a rule book usually, because the rule book, if anything, it refers to its entirety. Basically, this one rule makes sense if you read the entire thing.
It's really interesting. If you go back to the sort of origins, sort of the Western European origins of education. Right. The Greeks had the right idea, and then probably they were hoisted on their own petard, because sort of Greek philosophy had heroes and great thinkers and great leaders, and we forgot for thousands of years what teaching is. If you go back to the original Platonic dialogues, they're just that. That's what teaching is, a dialogue.
Right.
Teaching is an exchange between the person who's teaching and the person who's learning. The person who's learning is just as important in the teaching process, because they're able to indicate to the teacher where they need to be taught. Yeah. And then you have these thousands of years, well, not thousands, hundreds, centuries, where the essence of teaching was a man usually, stood behind a lectern, broaching no comment, having no input from the audience, and the audience passively sitting there listening, taking notes. And it's only sort of in the modern age...
University, basically.
Indeed. It's only sort of in the modern age now where we're getting back to this notion of teaching being a dialogue. The teacher sitting on the same level with the student and discussing. And when you teach board games, this is very valuable, because if someone doesn't understand, they're able to say, I don't understand. Then you can clarify that a lot better. And because some notions are very intuitive, even for non-gamers, right? They're very intuitive. You place this here, you take this. That's a very intuitive thing. Some things are non-intuitive. Some things subvert classic sort of game heuristics, okay? And for the person to be able to say, I don't understand, and then for people to go, okay, this is this and this is this, and then form donkey bridges to help them remember that. For the English listeners there, I translated a German phrase, aide de memoires, I guess, in English. In German, it's donkey bridge for some reason.
You took it from French?
We took it from French. Right. And, to help people learn. Okay, so just to sum up.
Right.
Because we have waffled sort of faux philosophy, which is nice.
Yeah, it's very faux.
What would be, let's say, top 3 tips you would give to people when teaching games?
Every rule should be explained in a way that makes it clear why that rule exists and why players should pay attention to it. This includes things like you take this resource because you need it later, like in Seven Wonders, you want to build resources because in H3 you do not get any additional resources, but also basic strategies. You want to do this now because later on you will want to spend your actions on other things. So tip number 1, always remember why the rule is there and why people should know about it.
My tip number 1 would be always explain the overarching journey of the turn. So you draw cards, you do these actions, of which are X, Y, and Z, then you clean up.
Right.
Just to repeat, on your turn, you draw cards, you do actions X, Y, and Z, then you clean up. Okay, now we'll move on to what the actions actually do. And I would do that 3 or 4 times, and that would be the last thing I would tell people when I'm teaching the overview of how their turn works.
Right, yeah.
Because then you get out of that thing of going, this space gets you 2 coins in exchange for 1 coal. This space gets you 2 coins in exchange for a cat. This space makes you want to slam your head off the table and hope there's a nail sticking out so you die. And when people explain a game in that way to you, you just go, great, I know what the spaces do, but what the fuck do I do? You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, exactly.
Okay, tip 2.
Tip 2, I think you sort of broached it as well. Redundancy. Redundancy is not superfluous in teaching a game. It is not annoying or wasting time. It is important for multiple reasons. 1, you reiterate that these are important things to remember because you repeated them. You should repeat them at basically every time you need a breather. You just repeat what you just said, sum it up. Do it a few times depending on how complex the game is. I mean, a game like Kobayakawa, which is like 2.5 rules, probably doesn't need much repetition, but even when I explain this game, I repeat the basic 3 rules at least 3 times over the course of my blathering. The second reason you want to do this has to do with people paying attention to you. They're going to get bombarded with information that's usually new to them. They need, or at least their brains need some breathing space. They need to know, all right, now I can sort of power down for a few seconds because the teacher's already told me these things. I'll absorb them, but I'm still sort of thinking about what was talked about earlier and whether I can remember them. And yeah, these are the basic reasons, sort of like repeat it because it's important and repeat it because allow the people paying attention to you to sort of digest what you've just told them.
So the important concepts in the game. So you can buy cards from the row, you put them into your discard pile, and then you shuffle them and you can draw them. After that, you can play them and they will give you benefits. That's the first time I would explain that. Dominion, for instance. Then, remember, you draw cards, put them into the discard pile, you can play them. Third time I explain that concept, you draw cards, you play them. So you start with a detailed, comprehensive explanation. Next time, you make it simpler. And the last time you explain that core concept, you make it a bullet point on an index card.
Yeah.
And so you're giving them the information. And then as it becomes less complicated, it's firing those neurons in their brain to say, actually, I go back to that original explanation, X, Y, and Z, blah, 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 blah. And so you gradually make the entrance into the rules of the game simpler towards the end of the explanation.
So at the end, you really want... I mean, most game explanations I do nowadays end up with a bullet point version of the entire game.
Yeah.
Basically, it's like bam, bam, it's like do this. And it's all centered around turn or on your turn sequence anyway, because the game is going to be played in that sequence as it is. So it makes sense to sort of get people acquainted with it multiple times during explanation. You're going to start with step 1, step 2, step 3. And then step 1, step 2, step 3. Then you explain one of these steps, then step 1, step 2, step 3. In my experience, also gives yourself a little room to breathe as I'm sorting out what next to explain.
Okay, so third tip.
Third tip. I mentioned it earlier, but I want to reiterate it here. Perform. Sell the game in a way that makes people understand the spirit of the game. If it's a mean-spirited game, make it clear that it's all about taking things away, destroying what other people are doing, interrupting them, just generally frustrating whatever they're planning. If it's a casual game, again, make it clear that this is all fun and games. It's all about laughing. It's all about doing something fun, doing something entertaining, but it's not necessarily about high-end strategies. I have one player in my regular gaming group who will always about 10 minutes into the game, try to come up with the best high-end strategy you can find. It's a bit frustrating because even the most easygoing games eventually broke down into, all right, apparently we're playing tournament style now. But it's, just something that I think as a teacher, as a rules teacher, you should pay attention to. How you're supposed to play the game, how you're supposed to think about the game matters in how people start applying these rules that you just taught them. So fluff text is important, but only in the sense of how you explain it. The fluff text, the content of the fluff itself doesn't really matter. Whether it's magic, whether it's future, whether it's past, whatever it is, the details don't matter, but the tone does. The way you talk about the setting is the way you talk about the rules, is the way people will respond to you and play the game.
Tone makes the music.
Ah, yes.
My third tip is learn this sentence. It only really works in games that are complex, but it's very useful. There are some edge cases that may happen during the game, but they don't happen very often. I'm not going to explain all of them to you now, because if I was, then the explanation would last 3 hours and we'd all lose the will to live. So if it happens, I'll just explain it then, but bear in mind, I'm not trying to cheat you. If you say that to people, if they don't accept it...
Very succinct, actually.
Yeah, if they don't accept it, then they don't accept it. But frankly, there will always be one person who will accuse you of underhand tactics. But it's better...
No, that's just with you.
I'm very good at it. I don't give a shit about winning. It's just, and I can think I got one person in my head right now. But the point is that if you set it out at the first, that this is the deal, and then if people continue not to accept it, you've got a get out clause and you've got a reason then to turn around and say, oi, dickbag, fuck off. I know you may have no fucking control in the rest of your shitty life, and I know you may feel like people are pissing on you from a great height every day you exist, but here you feel like you can assert a little bit of control because you're surrounded by people who wilt under your aggression, but it's not acceptable. It's not acceptable, and if you do it, I'm going to take you outside, I'm going to take your balls, and I'm going to get a lighter, and I'm going to singe all the fucking hair off your fucking balls, you dick fucking twat. And then you sit down and you play the game.
Well, that's a very, very aggressive way of playing Takenoko, but yeah.
Shave a panda. Is that your name on the list? Well, get in there then. Get to the bar and get buckled. Welcome to the guild. What do you think?
I'm impressed. I have nobody seen do this with their own penis.
Yeah, well, I thought that, it's a very musical place, this place.
Yeah.
They've constantly got loud music.
They do.
And so I thought, I get in on the act.
You should do that, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I keep going to the bar.
Right.
And they keep saying to me, come on, Ben, you've got to get in on the act.
That is true.
And they say, come downstairs, get in on the act. And I assume downstairs is the rehearsal rooms for the bands.
I think so, yeah. Apparently, there's also some sort of a meeting hall.
Yeah.
Their politicians there had a sign like, clean up after Santorum.
Right, is that Latin?
I think so, yeah.
They're so intellectual here. They come across, you sit at the bar talking to these people, and they come across as nice fellas.
Yeah,
just normal guys.
This is one guy. He keeps keeping me stinking eye. Don't like him.
But, you wouldn't have thought that they would have had such a broad range of interests.
And musical styles.
Yeah.
Well, I think 20 ways of listening to I'm impressed.
Well, that's it. I've been practicing. Look, this is the beat.
All right.
Get this. What do you think?
Yeah, maybe practice it at home again.
Yeah, I've got to practice, obviously. Rome wasn't built in a day, was it?
No, burnt down in one though.
If you believe the history, but we all know the history books were written by aliens and disseminated by cats.
No, I think the argument goes, history is written by victors, therefore it's all false.
Anyway, Georgios, so the guild's been rather empty, isn't it?
Well, I wouldn't call it empty. It's called void.
Do you think it's the summer break?
That might be a reason, yeah. Or maybe we just don't have particularly engaging questions. Maybe we should talk to them about musical styles more.
Like this musical style.
No, oh god, no.
Like that.
Please stop.
That was my rendition of Islands in the Stream by Dolly Parton and Ken Miller.
Again, please stop.
So, go on the Guild.
Yes.
Right. Say
348.
Would you like more of my musical stylings or fewer of my musical stylings? I think, well, it'll come out on top that my musical stylings are quite magnetic and draw the audiences in a way that they don't quite fathom nor limbically understand.
Yeah, I think coming out on top is going to be huge in this book.
Absolutely. So, anyway, what was the question, Georgia?
I think the question had to do with feelings, because we had some of those. Which emotions would you like board games to elicit, or are they simply incapable? Who does they refer to?
Who does they refer to?
Yes.
Sentence. So, we had a response, Georgia?
Yes.
We didn't have very many responses, to be honest, did we?
No, not a lot.
I don't know why. Are we too intellectually grand?
That must be it.
Are our edifices...
Orifices?
Edifices, Georgios.
I know.
Stop dragging it down to the gutter all the time. It really is hard, people.
Gutter?
It really is hard being the cultural effluence, that's the word, isn't it? Cultural effluence of this show, while others just drag it down into the sewers and make crude innuendos.
I think it's worse than being dragged by Jenny Agatha.
It's Agatha, anyway.
But then the joke doesn't work.
Anyway, what did Tony Boydell say?
He wants tension and release. Actually, I've heard that being said a lot.
In here?
Yeah.
Yeah, I want some tension and release. I think that's a German techno act, isn't it?
I am quite certain it is, yes. Now you mention it, yeah.
Yeah, couldn't we have some tension and release?
Yeah, makes sense. So tension and release. So are board games capable of doing that? What do you think?
Yeah, of course they are. You get tense and you think, oh, he's going to take my space, and he doesn't take your space, and then you place it and you go, look at that, I got all the monies.
So let's chalk it up as a maybe. I want to feel smart at the end. Even if I did sweep the table back into the box and drop off home early. I can't identify with that, Georgios, because I always feel smart. Because, I mean, the thing is, it's quite difficult. And we know feelings are as good as facts.
I mean, I know you were brought up in Germany.
Yes.
So you have a difficulty with empathy. But
I'm not sure what you mean.
But, it's difficult for me always. Just try and empathise with me here, Georgios. It's quite difficult for me.
It's sticky.
Always being the smartest person in the room, Georgios. I say stuff, what's real clever in that. And then I can see people, they pull these expressions. It's kind of like, they've eaten curdled milk or something. And I know what that expression is. They're trying to parse my intelligent pearls of wisdom through their cerebella.
I think you're right. They're trying to pass what you said through their system.
Exactly, and they can't grok it because it's of a higher intellectual nature mostly.
I'm sure there's something they can't do with it, yeah. Anyway, Tony also wants to feel tested.
Do you want to feel tested in games, Georgios? You're not one of those, are you? You like to sort of breeze through, and it doesn't matter really if we're playing a game. You might as well be at the pub.
No. You bring up the pub. Also, we have the guild. I don't need a pub.
That's true.
No, but tested, I don't know. Do you really... it's difficult, because, sometimes maybe, but generally, no. I wouldn't go so far as your crass caricature of my position, but I wouldn't go so far as to say I need to feel tested. It's nice to be a little engaged, though, but tested, I don't know.
You see, it depends on the definition of the word tested, you see.
Yes.
So I don't want my tolerance for pedantry to be tested, for instance. You know what I mean? I don't want that to be tested. I don't want my...
Is that why the guild bits are so short?
Exactly.
I see.
I don't want my temper, the shortness of my temper, tested by people, Georgios.
Right.
But I quite like an intellectual test. Can I convert this sugar into coins, into points, and into the glowing feeling of having gone round the board more than another person, Georgios? That's a test that I can embrace.
No, actually, I'll test it. I don't know. I actually, surprisingly, though I think about it, no, I'm not really looking to be tested, because I don't see the point.
So, he says he wants tension and release, Yes. He wants to feel smart at the end, he wants to feel tested, and then he asks... Am I unrealistic in these expectations? Is he, Georgios, unrealistic?
God damn it.
In these expectations.
Kind of limp sounding.
That's the sound of metal. Quite quite swiftly smacking on my teeth, Georgios. It was actually quite painful and you laughed at it.
Yes. Like you said, I have trouble with empathy.
Is he unrealistic in these expectations?
No,
Georgios?
No, I don't think he's unrealistic. I think these are goals he can set for himself, but I doubt that he will always get them out of board games, because most of them rely on other people. I mean, maybe the tested bit, but even then, you only really test it by how much of a challenge other players put up in a competitive game. So get yourself a better group, Tony.
Well, it depends, doesn't it, on what kind of competitive game you're playing. If it's multiplayer solitaire competitive game, then you're basically mano or yourselfo, aren't you?
You were really desperately trying to get a pun in, weren't you?
I don't descend to those levels, Georgios. I'm an intellectual man mountain. So we go to Barry Dublé.
Yes. Where is he?
And he says, I want to feel socially accepted when playing my games. Now, I have a question for you, Georgios.
Does it say accepted, as in, removed?
No. Don't be a pedant, Georgios.
Don't rely on writing.
He spelled it wrong. That's not his fault.
All right, okay.
But I have a question for you.
French spelling, yes.
Can someone who has so few hearts on board game links actually ever really be accepted in society, Georgios?
I mean,
is that a possibility?
Yes. I think Christmas is the time to accept these people.
Well, it's a charitable time, isn't it?
Yeah.
Time for charity. But do you want to be socially accepted, Georgios? That's more your sort of squashy, hippie arena, isn't it? Talking to people and that.
Yeah.
Do you want to be socially accepted?
I think I would take offense to this phrasing, in that it implies that I am not. And despite, 4 restraining orders to the contrary, I consider myself socially accepted.
Do you?
5, actually.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Because I've read some of those restraining orders.
Well, most of them are sort of... They're very, let's say...
The defendant...
imaginative in the description of what I allegedly did.
The defendant, from here on in, referred to as Waggle My Cock Man.
That was my second superhero name, yeah.
I mean, that's not socially acceptable, is it?
Well, superheroes... No,
That's true. Superheroes are rarely understood by the societies in which they live, aren't they?
That is true, yeah.
Well, here we are, Georgios. That was pretty much all the response we got.
Very short.
But valuable.
Well, some of us are more familiar with shortness than others.
Absolutely. I was speaking to one half of Tension and Release the other day.
Oh, which one?
And one's a sort of short, sort of skinhead man.
Right.
And one's a very tall, sort of 6'8", long blonde-headed man.
Okay.
And the short one does all the sort of singing and that, the dancing. And then he's Tension.
Obviously.
And Release is the beats master.
So he beats.
He beats. He does it in his own house, so he beats himself.
Well, that sounds painful.
Anyway, nothing more to report on Janine.
No.
We've not moved forward in our quest to reconvene our loving relationship. She's civil, Georgios.
Civil is good.
She's not cold.
How long does it take for his training order to take effect?
Well, she's just being nice. And, I'm going to go and ask her for a drink. I stopped drinking frappes.
Why?
They were going onto my hips, Georgios. You know what they say.
All I know about is that hips don't lie. So
that's true, because they don't have vocal folds, so they can't enunciate words.
Well, if they
so
do,
they're incapable of lying, technically
speaking.
speaking.
If they do have folds, you might want to cut down on the frappes.
Indeed. So I'm going to go and whack some Tension and Release on the stereo very loud.
I'm not sure that's the correct pronunciation of that.
Say goodnight, Georgios.
No. It's a children's show.
I'm Nick Mariner, and this segment is all mine. Winning isn't everything. It's the only thing. Vince Lombardi, former head coach of my beloved Green Bay Packers. Hello everyone and welcome back. I apologize again for missing the last episode. I think all the travel for family and comedy stuff has come and gone. So my team of committed and unpaid interns and I are officially back on track and ready to talk some games. I didn't set out to have a unified theme over the last couple of episodes. But this is the third segment of mine in a row in which I decided to explore a basic question. How important is fill in the blank? As I said, I didn't really plan it, as is evidenced by the fact that the last contribution, how important are board games, would have been a much better beginning or end note, rather than sandwiched in between these other probably much less interesting ones. So in typical fashion, I'll start with the overarching question on my mind, then pull back into story time before discussing it further. And this week, that question is this: how important is winning in board games? Great. So, story time. Last night, as of this recording, I went to my weekly game group meetup, finally getting back to the table after a month of almost no games whatsoever, and we played 2 games, Railways of the World and Isle of Skye. Railways of the World I have never played before. I love Martin Wallace. Brass is one of my favorite games of all time. I have a passing knowledge of Steam and Age of Steam, which utilize the same systems as Railways, and I love train games with route building and pick up and deliver mechanics, so I was really looking forward to playing it. The guy who owned the game taught it well, even though neither he nor any of us had ever played it, and we went at it. I had a perfectly firm grasp of how to play, not necessarily how to play well, and I picked a strategy that seemed available and gave it a shot. It was probably an hour into a game that lasted a little over 3 hours that I realized I was going to lose the game. And not just lose, but finish in an epic, undeniable dead last. About an hour later, it was pretty clear that in this 5-player game, we were all watching a 2-player contest for winner. That meant over half the table spent almost half the game just playing, but not competing. Once the end game initiated and we all did the basic house cleaning round to calculate final scoring, the owner of the game made a comment that boiled down to an apology that no one enjoyed the game. We all quickly assured him we actually had, even though we also kind of hadn't. I think what we were rushing to assure him was the game itself is quite good, in fact, really good, and that we'd be happy to play it again another time when everyone had a better knowledge of how to strategize toward victory. But this particular play of the game, the vast majority of which was going through the motions as a learning process, was not really fun at all, other than for the company, which in this group is always warm and welcome. Then we played Isle of Skye, this year's Kennerspiel winner. If you remember from way back, sweet committed listener, our eminent hosts reviewed this game in an early episode of the show, and I think they came down somewhere in the liked it, didn't love it range. I am certain, now having played it several times, that I'm leaning toward the love it, personally. Had I played it sooner, I most likely would have named it a top game of 2015 for me, probably not better than the Grizzled or Motainai, but still pretty high on the list. I love trying to figure out the best way to manage money and set market prices. I think the tile laying and tableau building is a fair modification of a Carcassonne system, and most importantly, the variable and rotating scoring mechanism is just really cool. And here's why I bring it up in contrast to Railways of the World. I lost that game too. I didn't come in last, and at one point I thought I might just have enough of in-game scoring to hand me the lead, but alas, I have finished third on the night. In fact, I have never won this game, other than in my first play at 2 players, which really isn't the way the game shines. I just can't quite figure out how to manage all the parts well enough to wind up victorious. So I think it's useful to point out, as I move toward considering the larger question of the importance of winning in a game, these 2 examples in which one game has grown on me quickly, even though I kind of suck at it, and another game where we were all able to see its merits despite the fact that most of us had impotent, fatalistic losing strategies. Let's return to the quote that I quoted to begin the segment. Winning isn't everything, it's the only thing. My high school coaches and the mouth-breathing knuckle-draggers who admired them were fond of saying that all the time, because it gave them permission to dominate other people and amass tens of glorious stories to carry them well through their inevitably less glorious adulthoods. The great Vince's point, for my purposes though, is this. Winning is the only thing that makes a game a game. Semantically, perhaps ontologically speaking, the existence of a win condition is the very thing that separates a game from some other kind of activity. So something like Loop and Chewy is a game, whereas Lego is a more creative play, because the former has a way to achieve quantifiable victory and the latter doesn't. Even though honestly, they're both just kind of toys, and I still don't understand why otherwise interesting board game commentators would spend one non-refundable second talking about Loop and Chewy other than that goddamn love of Star Wars that I think I've already made very clear I could do without. I put this question of winning and its importance out on Twitter, and I got the standard replies of yes, it matters, but not as much as the experience and the interaction and the good times and blah, 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 blah. But we must move forward acknowledging the simple fact that our chosen activity is games, and winning is the precise reason we are all there. In 1979, a historian named Christopher Lasch published a book called The Culture of Narcissism, which is one of the most misquoted and misused works of popular history in recent memory. In it, he traces an intellectual trend stemming from the late 19th century and contends that the post-World War II society suffers from a learned pathology that could be diagnosed as self-absorption and lack of considering the social over the individual. Shared any pictures of what you were about to eat for all to see as if your meal is meaningful enough to make it into my day lately? Yeah, that kind of thing. We don't need to go into great detail about the book itself, especially since I haven't read it or even thought about it since grad school. But I do remember the passage very clearly in which he lamented the everybody gets a medal mentality of participation in competitive activities. Is that the attitude to take about board games or competition in general, that we should harken back to uber-stressful, bloodthirsty, annihilation-oriented conquest? Obviously, that's just silly. Look, I'm recording this today, still dripping with sweat and a little sunburnt, having just gotten home from a late July outdoor swim meet for my daughter. Why? Why outside? She swam 3 races, did well, improved her times, and finished no better than 4th in any race. But I stood right next to the pool, and every time she got out, I gave her a big hug and said, "Good job." Because she went out there and she tried, and she's 9. And what the hell does it matter if she won or lost on this Saturday morning where all of us, including her, would much rather be inside watching a movie because it's Texas. And it's the summer, and the sun is not our friend. All of that is to ask that you don't misunderstand me. I'm not universalizing our community to say we are all competitive in the same way, or that we should prioritize winning above all these other things like interacting and community building. Only that pretending as if we play games without interest in winning is either disingenuous or contrary to the entire point of the activity of choice. But how important is winning, actually? Keeping in mind all the other things that make board games a great hobby, I think the answer to the question is still very. For 2 reasons. The first I don't feel like I need to spend a lot of time on, because our host Georgios has already talked about it in a way that's more insightful than I probably will be, when I would just end up making some sort of dick joke. Georgios' point in some of the earlier segments, and I discussed it briefly when talking about games ending in ties, is that the main focus of each player at the table needs to be an earnest attempt to play the game according to its parameters and achieve victory. And under that basic understanding, we can still have a good time. If someone is trolling the game or making moves that disrupt this engagement, it ruins the fun for everyone. And my second reasoning is this: winning is fun. Don't be hesitant to describe it that way. You're not being selfish or aggressive in thinking that. It might be a masculinity thing, even if it's a female player prioritizing winning over diplomatic play. I've read a couple feminist critiques that get to that point, and they're pretty well argued, but that's a whole socialization of gender roles thing, and I don't really want to talk about it now. Look, when you sit down to the next game session, pay attention to the face of the winner as soon as that moment of victory occurs. That person's face lights up guaranteed. Even if they're trying to be magnanimous or too cool for school, it's the eyes that give them away. Winning is just fun, and it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that, really. I don't get to experience it as often as I'd like with my group because we have some really good board game players, but that just makes the moments when it happens that much more enjoyable. Am I advocating being an asshole at the table, or war without mercy, to borrow another historian's turn of phrase? Of course not. We all want to enjoy ourselves because it's leisure, and sacrificing a good time in the name of victory at all costs is the worst possible dick move. Winning is fun, but it is just a game after all. Focusing on winning and recognizing that it is essential and important and yes, just plain fun, also helps us sharpen our games criticism sensibilities too, I think. Most of us want to win. I don't think that's too broad of a generalization. And the game designer's job is to give us all at the table a fair shot at victory. That's one of the reasons I think I'm so currently into Isle of Skye, because the randomness of tile draw is mitigated by each player getting to set their own prices and manipulate their private economies. When a game has a clearly overpowered path to victory that can't be thwarted, or a runaway leader problem in which one player runs amok and the others spend the rest of the game unable to hit the brakes, it robs from everyone else at the table the very thing that's supposed to make a game fun, a legitimate shot at that moment when your eyes go wide and you get to say, I win. It's with that understanding that you can lose every time you play a game and still come to love it if the design of the game protects and ensures equal opportunity for victory for all players and all viable strategies. However, I haven't even begun to talk about the role of players at the table in protecting that equal opportunity for victory, and I'm out of time. So I think that'll have to be our segment for the next episode. In the meantime, I'm Nick Mariner, on Twitter at TheGoodMariner, and my board game blog is iCallYellow at iCallYellow.com. Thanks for listening.
It's crass, unsophisticated, and emotionally manipulative.
It's this week's review. You know how it is. You get to a new boarding school, find yourself a group of friends, and the first thing you do is exactly the opposite of what the Hatmaster told you. In this case, you get up and open that big book of madness. Because, hey, why not? You're young, you're cool, and you can do magic. What's the worst that could happen? Except for the half dozen of demons and magical critters that are now pouring out of the book and laying waste to everything and everyone around you. Unless you're smart and quick enough before it's all over. If you manage to close the book, you're golden. And you do that by carefully combining your skills, magical abilities, and so on to fight those critters back before they drive you insane. This game is called Big Book of Madness for a reason. So you play cards to cast spells, gain more cards, get rid of bad cards, all while under a very strict and tight turn and action limit. It's your sanity and lucky hand against some pretty ghastly creatures.
Yeah, skip to the end.
It's the one-sentence review.
At first, seemingly simplistic and distinctly without wonder, this game soon ramps up to become difficult, intricate, and maddening.
The Big Book of Madness does not reinvent the wheel, but puts shiny rims on it, a flashy new coat of paint, and delivers exactly what it promises. A tight, fun, but not too heavy cooperative experience.
George Oz? Ooh, what's that in the corner of the room?
I don't know, but it's eating peanuts with its nose.
So, Georgios.
Yes, Ben.
The elephant in the room.
It is big.
So
small, maybe.
I'll tell you a little anecdote.
Go on.
Last year at Essen Spiel 2015,
2015.
I wended my merry way over to the yellow booth.
I see.
It's always quite an imposing, large structure.
It is. They do have a lot of very spacious games.
And they were pushing their big release of Essen.
Right.
By having a competition.
Oh.
And what you did is you walked up to the booth.
Right.
And you opened this grimoire of insanity. And depending on what page you turned, you either won a prize of varying qualities or you won nothing.
I see.
I won £2 off a game.
Excellent.
So I wended my merry way over and bought Niet.
Well, makes sense.
A friend of mine won the better prize, and I've got inverted commas here, and that was a work of art from their big release of that year, Georgios, which was
The Big Book of Madness.
Indeed, and it was Yellow's big release, and they put a lot of effort into it, and they were putting a lot of energy, and then it sank without trace.
It did.
There was a little bit of buzz spoken about it, sort of post the convention.
Right.
People within the board game community talked about it, said they enjoyed it, thought it was a good game. Mm-hmm. They talked about how nicely it was produced, if that's of any bloody importance, and then it sank without trace.
Yes.
And no one talks about it now. I've never seen it played in Game Group. Mm-hmm. You bought it, and I was surprised.
Right.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think the obvious answer would be that it was sort of steamrolled by the huge releases of Pandemic Legacy and Time Stories, which were like, and still are, some of the biggest releases of last year. There was Codenames, which is still a fantastic game that caught everyone's attention. There was the re-release of Through the Ages. There were a lot of huge, great games out there, but for some reason this sort of disappeared, and I think some of it has to do with the fact that while it looks very nice, the art design is nice to look at, it's colorful, it seems to lack a really easy to grasp hook. I mean, you can easily sell Pandemic Legacy as, you know, this is this game that you play through and things change and you rip up cards. You can sell Time Stories as this is a big pile of shit that costs far too much. You can sell Codenames as this is a Spiel des Jahres winner, and it's really it's open to everyone. Everyone can play it. Everyone can get into it. And you can sell even Through the Ages as one. This is the really re-release of a highly valued game by a highly valued designer.
Pillar.
Sure, that
of
is
the modern hobby.
Pillock, anything. Anyway, so there are a lot of huge games that can easily sell, but it's difficult to sell Big Book of Madness in a way that gets people excited. It's a co-op game. It has some, I guess, not card drafting, deck building mechanics in it, and that's it.
Well, I think it falls between two stools too, to some degree.
Right.
Because to me, it looks like a kid's game.
Okay.
It's called The Big Book of Madness. It has Harry Potter type characters on the front cover in their wizard school uniforms. And it's not a kid's game.
No.
It's not a difficult, heavy, complex game, but it's not a kid's game. But the problem is it doesn't come across as a gamer's game. And when you play it, it's also not really a gamer's game either. So it has that thing is you play it and you go, nice. Mm-hmm. I mean, very, very accomplished.
Yeah.
But not crunchy enough for me and not easy enough for my kids. And so it falls into that morass of sort of unquantifiability, which makes it difficult to sell, I think.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's trying to appeal to both markets a bit, but by doing so doesn't really entice either to go out and buy it. I haven't actually seen the kids angle, but now that you mention it, the entire setting of being in a school and being, magical apprentices, whatever, does seem to suggest that it's supposed to appeal to at least, if not kids, then at least to what's the word between kids and adults? Semi-adults. Teenagers.
Teens.
Ah, yes, I remember those. Teens maybe. And maybe it does. I'm actually right now I can firmly say I'm far too removed from my teenage years to know what appealed to me then.
I mean, the thing is, this game does not appeal to teenagers.
I don't know.
It's far too safe, cute to appeal to teenagers, just stylistically. Mm-hmm. When you're a teenager, you like stuff with a bit of edge and maybe a bit of cleavage.
Yeah,
and things like that. And and Yellow have their sort of games for adults. They have their games for kids. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of people just thought, well, this is one of their kids' games. Yeah. So I'm not going to be interested in that.
Yeah, no, that's probably it. I think it doesn't quite sell itself as a gamer's game to the extent that it is, and it doesn't quite sell itself as a kid's game to the extent that it is or isn't. It has a lot of competition, and it sank, unfortunately. And I think somewhat undeservedly.
Yeah, it's like one of those aging geriatric alcoholics who stumble back urine-trousered from the bar, and then they fall between two stools.
So, what did you think of my interactive, candid photo montage?
Well, it was certainly an experience.
All right then, Georgie Porgy,
yes,
sitting there opposite me.
Binned in.
What kind of experience did you have playing this game?
I was surprised in how it ramps up tension, how it ramps up challenge, because at first it seems slightly convoluted at first as you set it up. You go, ooh, there's so many things to figure out. And then once you get into it, you go, all right, I can sort of see what I can do, what I'm supposed to do, and then it gradually just increases tension and challenge. It becomes more difficult as you play. And I thought that was quite impressive. I was trying to think back on any other game that has such a smooth transition from starting difficulty to later rounds, because I don't feel that there's like an obvious switch that is turned that really ramps up the difficulty. It just becomes increasingly more difficult as your deck has the wrong cards in it, as you need to kind of waste actions to get rid of cards, and you don't want to get rid of certain cards, but you have to keep certain cards, and so on and so forth.
Okay, so just to fill the listening public in.
Yes.
You get drawn curses. You get monsters and they bestow curses. These curses have a set of symbols on them that you need to play out of your hand to dispense with the curse. So some of them might be 4 blue symbols, 4 green symbols, 4 red symbols, 4 white symbols, or they may be one of each.
Right.
And you have to dispense of all 4 curses before the timer track gets to the beginning of the round again, which is 5 turns, I believe.
Yes, 5 turns.
Otherwise, the monster will do a negative effect on you. And these effects could be making you throw away cards of a decent value. There is a madness deck. And this is a deck builder where you get better value cards, you put them into your deck, you reshuffle, you redraw, you play. But every time you reshuffle, you draw these madness cards that go into your deck and just clog your deck up. And you can lose by drawing a hand of just 6 madness cards. If that happens, you lose. If you run out of madness cards, you lose. If you get to the final monster and you don't dispense all of their curses, you lose. And these madness cards just clog up your deck, and when you need that number 3 green, you can't play it because it's a bloody madness card.
Exactly. Although I would quibble that I think the set collection element is far stronger than the deck element collection. I think the deck building part, I think this is what people focus on, and I think that might lead to some disappointment because the deck building just happens as you play. It's not, I think, the focus so much of the game as it is getting the right hand into your hand, the right cards.
But that's about building a deck, though, isn't it? That's about buying the correct cards to go into your discard pile to shuffle up to increase the probability of pulling them into your hand.
But when I think of deck building games, I also think of combos. I also think of how to best combine cards to do certain things. And I'm not sure, I wouldn't say that this game relies heavily on these things.
Well, that's interesting because it comes to my experience when I first started playing it. First couple of turns, I thought this is terrible. This is hugely simplistic. What I'm basically matching symbols on cards. This is uninteresting. And it's, for the first 2 turns, I thought this is a kid's game. I'm playing a kid's game, and why am I wasting my time playing this kid's game? But what's really interesting is that as the difficulty ramps up with the game, as the necessity to leverage the help of your teammates becomes more apparent, what is seemingly simplistic develops in complexity and develops in profundity and becomes by the end of the game a very challenging, very knotty game. And it won me over in spite of myself, this game, because the mechanics are very simple, but you have certain things you can do that contribute to the complexity of the game. And by the end, I was quite surprised at how much I enjoyed it.
Yeah, I think it's, I think one thing I want to mention also, because I'm not quite sure whether we get to talk about it later, it makes more sense later, is the presentation, which I think is important. It's very colorful. It's very, very bright, but it's the same, graphic designer as, Seasons and Lords of Zidit. He goes by one of his pseudonyms.
Ninesi or something, isn't it?
Nayade or something. I think, he's Javier or Xavier or something or other. Durant, maybe. See, that's how much research I do. I remember the first name. Again, I might have mentioned earlier that I like Seasons because of its graphic design. I like this game also partly because of its graphic design, because it's strong, it's vibrant, it's dynamic, it's approachable, but it still has this sort of undercurrent of creepiness to it. Because we are dealing with magical creatures trying to kill you, basically. Or at least drive you mad. And there's something, for some reason, there's something very appealing about this that makes me want to pull it out of my shelf, lay it out on the table, and play it. Because I just like indulging in looking at this game, because it's fun. And the second point I want to mention, because I think I would have mentioned if the game swung the other way, you have 4 schools of magic, according to these elements. and you have 8 characters in total to choose from. 2 of each school of magic. One is a male character, one is a female character, and they are different. They are not sort of gendered in a way that like all the female characters are healers or anything. The female characters are not depicted in a way that's supposed to be titillating.
They are bloody school kids after all.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's that. But they're just cool. I think I especially remember one of the female characters just looks really, really cool. Like a really punky hairstyle, like an aggressive stance. And it reminded me of all the other games where artists tried to depict strong female characters and they just ended up in a weird looking lingerie.
Yeah.
This is not the case. This is just kids, or teenagers at least, looking strong, looking capable, looking ready for a fight, and it's just fun to sort of have these characters and play them. I just want to mention that this is something I really appreciated about this game, because there was both the same numbers of characters, male and female. They were not depicted in any specifically sexualized position. They dressed the way teenagers in a magical school might dress, not like Harry Potter style, but more like, I don't know, Degrassi. I don't know. I just like this. I just like this idea of having just these random types. Some of them are heavier, some of them are thinner, some of them are nerdy, some of them are cool. There's something very, very human about the way these characters are depicted, and I like that. Alright, so how about this? You take a tenuous grasp of reality, a lot of condescension, at least 4 cups, and a slow-wittedness masked through pretensions of prolixity.
Well, that's you, isn't it?
Yeah, it's design.
So I didn't like this game when I first played it, and by the end of it, I was pleasantly surprised. And the question is why? And I think there are certain design choices in this game that lead to that. I think co-ops need an arc.
Right.
I think part of the reason I don't like Ghost Stories, for instance, is it starts, it becomes incredibly difficult, then it ends. There's no... It's like... Ghost Stories is like a Michael Bay film. You know, It's 2 hours of just action scenes knitted together with no nuance and no peaks and no troughs. This game has a definite arc. It starts off easy, it ramps up its difficulty. And the one design choice in this game that I think is absolutely fantastic, and I remarked on it when we were playing it, is the madness mechanic.
Yeah.
Because it's very, very simple. So every time, because deck building, one of the joys of deck building is that bit when you reshuffle your deck and you draw the cards and you're thinking, I'm going to draw the fucking cool cards now. This is great. But in this, every time you reshuffle, you have to put a madness card in. You're devaluing the power of your deck, which thematically is nice. It's implying the longer you go, the more prone you are to madness. But also sort of mechanically, it is ramping up in a very subtle way that is almost unnoticeable at the beginning of the game. 1 madness card out of 20 is nothing. But there are effects in the games that give you madness cards. Every time you shuffle, you draw madness cards. And gradually, they become a prevalent part of your deck. They become a problem that you have to solve. It's not just the problem that the monster of the game is throwing at you, these curses you've got to dispense. You're fighting against your own deck. You're fighting against yourself, which thematically can imply you're fighting against your own mind being corrupted, which I think is really evocative. It's done very simply. It's beautifully simple mechanic that is 1 sentence in a rulebook that just absolutely works both on a game level and a theme level. And I think this is the genius of this game.
I generally agree, and I'm going to bet I might like this even slightly more than you, but I'm still going to point out the things that I think don't quite work. In that player count makes a huge difference in this game.
Well, we played 2-player.
We played 2 players.
And it was challenging and crunchy.
Yes, I thought it was great. I think it was a 2-player game. It worked really, really nice. I think the first time I played it, it was a 3-player game. We lost as well. We played some rules wrong. We made some fundamentally boneheaded decisions, but it was also challenging, but in a way that about the last was sort of like we knew we were on a doomed cruise, so it's just like how far can we get before we finally lose. I played it once with 4 players, and with 4 players, because we spread out all these schools evenly, it was underwhelmingly easy. We actually really about I think you go through six monsters in total. I think by the third monster, we had it all down. We could dispense with them easily. We had almost no madness in our decks. And I looked at the rulebook again, and there's no change in anything about the game, almost anything about the game, about the difficulty when you change players. The only thing that changes is the size of the madness deck. That's the only change. It seems to me that with certain player counts, this game sort of loses its challenge.
Well, it has kind of uninspiring levels, sort of difficulty levels.
Yeah.
In that all you do is you just play more curse cards.
Yes.
That's kind of uninspiring.
Yes, at first I agree, but because, well, if you pay attention to the curse cards, all the multicolored curses, so basically you need one of each, which at the beginning of the game is fairly easy because you have fairly spread out deck. But later on, as your deck sort of changes shape, you might have gotten rid of certain colors or focus on other colors. It becomes increasingly difficult to get rid of these multicolored curses.
Okay.
So it does, in a very subtle way, it does increase the challenge by forcing you to tackle this game differently.
So what we haven't explained is the cooperative element of this game,
Yes.
really.
Right.
So on your player board, you have what is called a support area. And you can play cards to this support area. And then other players can play those cards. So you have this discussion of, well, shall I put a green down here or should I put a blue down here? Are you going to need that this turn? So that's one way in which it's cooperative and promotes discussion. And co-op games should promote discussion. That's their MO, And a second way is there is one spell, you get 4 standard spells, and one spell is giving other people actions. And you can give them up to 3 actions that they play out of turn. So you can combo, you can say, okay, I'm going to destroy this curse, because you can play the cards in your hand. So I'm going to destroy this curse, I'm going to play this to support, and then I'm going to give you 3 actions, and then you destroy this curse. And so there is a lot of planning and back and forth about when you do your actions. Do you do your actions on your turn? Do you play them out of turn? Is it expedient to do it now? Can we save till later? Can we save these cards for now? That's where I think as a co-op it works.
Yeah.
Because there is discussion. Mm-hmm. Co-ops are there to encourage people to sit, look at each other in the eyes and talk and plan.
I agree. I think I would go so far as that it's not just their MO, it's their raison d'être. It's the reason
that was the word I was looking for.
Right. Yeah, so basically
Raisin bread,
yeah. This is what the game is about. Every co-op game, I think, is about not plotting your move, which is just something you do, but talking with the other players, engaging the other players, finding a solution that everyone can agree on. What I liked from the gaming side in this game was that the problem the game posed to you that gave you to solve, like how do we deal with these curses, with these negative effects before the timer track runs out and before we sort of lose this battle, is a crunchy problem, even in the first level, but it's not so crunchy as to overwhelm you if you're somewhat familiar with games. It's something you can handle. It's something you can sort of already see how you might tackle it because you have a number of actions available to you. It does this very, very excellent job of both showing you that it's possible, encouraging you that this is something you can solve, while still kind of slightly making it difficult to actually solve it. Basically, it's a challenge that doesn't discourage you, even at the later levels. And it's a challenge that you always actually feels like a challenge.
And it's a co-op game that allows you to get your feet under the table.
Right.
The first levels are not so challenging, so you can get your head around not just the rules of the game, but the milieu of the game, how to discuss with people, what to do when. It lets you put your feet under the table before it starts to get difficult, which is what great co-ops do, which is what Pandemic does.
Right.
Which is what I think Robinson Crusoe, although it's very hard, does. These games allow you to get your feet under the table, then they present difficulty. And in this, I think Big Book of Madness works.
Playing this made me want to play.
So, Georgios.
Yes, Ben.
What did this make you want to play?
No, it reminded me in a roundabout way of another co-op game I have where you talk a lot and it's very challenging, but it's a bit more random and there's no magic involved. It's Say Bye to the Villains by Seiji Kanai.
Okay, I hear terrible things about this game.
Then you've heard wrong. It's actually quite fascinating. It's far more random than you would think. It's unfair at points. But the idea of sort of going up, basically it's a card game where every player has a sort of villain they need to take care of. If you have 4 players, you have 4 villains to fight. And all these villains have hidden cards that have sort of effects that negatively affect you. So basically you need to play your hand to figure out what you're up against, and if you do know what you're up against, to sort of boost your own stats to fight the villain, either by being faster, quicker, or anything like that. And there's some special effects that sort of flip things around. Anyway, it reminded me of the game because there's a lot of discussion going on. There's a lot going, who should go where? How can you help me? I need a boost here. You should go there because there's special ability. It's a lot of plotting and a lot of figuring things out. But where Big Book of Madness is kind of fair in that you know exactly what you're up against. Say Bye to the Villains is just hilariously unfair because it's almost impossible to really know how strong the opponent is until the final battle, until you actually have played all your cards and you resolve who's winning and who's losing. And there are things that there are cards that completely flip things around. So there's always this small risk of things blowing up in your face. Which I guess is why people are frustrated about it, but then again, most people are whinging about things.
So this one made me, now you'll be really surprised to hear this.
Yes.
Made me want to play another Frenchy co-op game that's played with cards, Georgios.
Is it Bridge?
No, but this time I want to play it, and it might just be actually that I just want to get hold of this expansion and then play it. It made me want to play the Grizzled with the At Your Orders expansion, Georgios.
Right.
And it might just be that I want to play the Grizzled with the At Your Orders expansion. Because the Grizzled is amazing. It is a card-based co-op game that is the leader in its genre. I mean, Big Book of Madness is good, enjoyable. The Grizzled is of a different level. And you're playing this and you're thinking, this is good, this is fun. Well, I'll play the Grizzled next.
Actually, that's interesting, because that's one thing I wanted to mention that I didn't mention earlier. I think I wrote it somewhere, and that finally got around to playing the Grizzled. I thought it was a bit random. I thought, yeah, makes sense. There was some replies going, no, it's not random at all. I think it's a very, if you do this, and this, if you sort of know how the deck is set up and know the cards and so on and so forth, I thought, yes, that's fair, but that's the kind of high level play I'm not really looking for, and the Grizzled, for example, didn't make me want to play on that level, and the Big Book of Madness also doesn't, but it doesn't ask me to. It doesn't need me to play on this really, really high level of counting my cards, of knowing exactly how many cards I have in my deck. A rough estimate works. I have been told by a friend of mine who enjoyed the game, but sort of eventually moved on to other games for that very same reason. He's the kind of player who looks for high-end strategies in these games, counts cards, who knows exactly, right, you bought 2 white ones and I have a white blue in my deck and so on and so forth. And I feel, and this I think is maybe that's just a difference of what you want out of the game. Big Book of Madness doesn't need you to do that. I've been told that Grizzled is actually winnable as opposed to just random when you play that level. And if you prefer that kind of high-end play, I can see Grizzled maybe being the better choice.
It's definitely the better choice. But, so, to get round to it.
Yes.
Should people buy this forgotten gem, Big Book of Madness? I
see, yeah. Professional voice actor,
Indeed.
I'm going to say yes. Generally, I think it's a good investment. Of course, I'm projecting what I want out of a game, which I just mentioned. I don't want high-end level strategy. I want a good time with friends. I want challenge, but not to be overwhelmed and not having to really squeeze my brain out of all of its liquids and just be completely, dry afterwards. I want a game that's fun, it's challenging, it makes me want to engage with other players. Another thing I forgot to mention as well, this is one that surprised me. There's absolutely no rules element that's set to keep out the alpha gamer. If you have an alpha gamer in your group, you're screwed. But then again, you're screwed anyway because you have an alpha gamer in your group.
We'll talk about this at another time. The alpha gamer thing is a fallacy, in my opinion.
Sure. But what I'm saying is this game does not have any rules to keep an alpha gamer from dominating the table.
And neither should they. So,
Exactly.
I think I'm torn because it's nice. I enjoyed it immensely, actually, but I wouldn't buy it. It
Right.
doesn't offer me the experience I want when I come out of a game. Mm-hmm. I demarcate things. I pigeonhole things. I'm quite happy to have this sort of shallow is not the right word, but this not sort of let's say not deep experience with things like card games, with little board games. But with something like this, I want something a bit more satisfying. I played Scythe last night, and I came out of it feeling like I'd just done something interesting and profound and enjoyable, but serious and thinky. And I want this game to be this. So I personally wouldn't buy it. If you want a nice knockabout light co-op though, it's beautifully put together. It's very well designed. It's very simple. And if you want that, buy it. But if you want something deeper, well, don't. Time again, Georgios, has caught up with us.
Oh, I was really fast this time. I'm quite sure you're wrong.
Like everything in life,
Yes.
especially those things that are good, we come to an end. And this is the end of another show, Georgios. It's been stimulating. It's been interesting. And because of the temperature, it's been rather sweaty here at Perfect Information Towers.
See, I do wonder. See, I suspect that almost nobody listens to this part of the show, and I've mentioned this a few times. And I feel this urge to just talk about complete gibberish and just see if anyone notices it.
Well, post in the guild. Tell us if you listen to this part of the show.
Yes, do.
Post in the guild.
See, again, this is, once again, we're running into a very strange corner now because we're not overflowing with responses to the guild. And now we don't know if people aren't responding because they don't listen to this part, or they're not responding because they just don't like to respond to the guild.
Well, let's test it.
Yes.
By giving them the details on how to contact us, Georgios.
That's a great plan. All right, so if you want to find the guild to respond to this bit and tell me whether you actually heard it, it's on Board Game Geek. It's number 2348, also known as the Guild of Perfect Information. And then you could possibly talk to us on Twitter. We have a Twitter account. It's called @InfoPerfected. And then there's Instagram, which is Perfect Information. And then there's the website, which is infoperfected.com. And then there's the mails. Lots and lots of emails. Actually, we are inundated with emails these days.
Too many.
Far too many. But if you want to add to them, you can write an email to infoperfected@gmail.com. Did I miss any?
I don't think you did, because I'm abandoning Snapchat. It's for the youths.
That sounds vaguely racist.
So, get on the guild, type in the magical password of this section, which is Bulbasaur. Type in...
Wait. Bulbasaur? How do you even spell that?
They'll work it out. They're intelligent people, Georgios.
But they don't listen to this part of the podcast.
Well, then they won't type Bulbasaur in, so it's fine. They won't need to know how to spell it, will they?
Yes, but if they don't respond because they don't know how to spell the secret word?
Just approximate Bulbasaur. And we'll see you next time. Don't let the crows peck out your eyeballs.